In November 1841, a group of gentlemen gathered for a meeting of the Numismatic Society of London. The subject of the day was a small, curious gold coin, recently procured in Rome. As the details were read out, a profound historical puzzle began to take shape. The coin bore the name of a famous Anglo-Saxon king, Offa of Mercia, who ruled in the 8th century. But surrounding his simple Latin title, Offa Rex, was a script that was utterly alien to the world of Christian England. It was elegant, angular Arabic, and its message was unmistakable. It was the Shahada, the Muslim profession of faith, and no one could figure out why it was on a Christian king's coin. Offa, who reigned from 757 to 796, was arguably the most powerful Anglo-Saxon ruler before Alfred the Great. He was a dominant force who could deal with the Frankish king Charlemagne on near equal footing. Their correspondence represents the oldest surviving diplomatic documents in English history. Offa was a king of immense ambition, demonstrated by grand projects like Offa's earthwork, a massive structure that still marks the border between England and Wales. He was also a savvy political operator who engaged directly and often contentiously with the Church. He even persuaded Pope Adrian I to grant him his own archbishopric at Lichfield, a move that centralized ecclesiastical power within his kingdom and away from Canterbury. This wouldn't be a lasting arrangement, and the archbishopric would be dissolved shortly after Offa's passing, but it showed his intense vision and ambition. Crucially for this mystery of the coin, Offa was a monetary visionary. His reign saw the most significant currency reform in Anglo-Saxon history, and he phased out the old currency and brought in a thin silver penny. This monetary reform was so successful that his successors would adopt variants which would remain in usage until after the Norman conquest. The new pennies were of exceptional artistic quality, often bearing elegant and surprisingly lifelike portraits of the king, far surpassing even contemporary Frankish coinage. For Offa, coinage was propaganda, a medium for projecting power and prestige. Seen in this light, the decision to mint a gold coin for international purposes was a logical next step for a ruler who had already mastered the use of currency as a tool of statecraft. The gold dinar itself is a masterpiece of flawed imitation. It's a direct and meticulous copy of a coin issued by the second Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mansur, in Baghdad. Its weight, at around 4 grams, closely matches the Abbasid standard, meaning it would have been accepted by weight in any market where the original was known. But for all this careful mimicry, the coin's Mercian origins are betrayed by a series of telltale errors. The most glaring is that the Latin inscription Offa Rex is stamped upside down in relation to the Arabic script that surrounds it. This is a telltale sign that the individual who designed the coin didn't actually understand what the script which was being copied meant. This mistake proves that the individual was simply copying a design from a coin which he didn't understand, treating the text on it as mere decoration, rather than a declaration of faith. These errors effectively demolish the most sensational theory about the coin, that Offa had secretly converted to Islam and issued the coin to indicate this. Since there's absolutely no indication that Offa knew anything about Islam, one of the most popular theories about what happened is actually quite ironic. Historical sources, including a letter from Pope Leo III, confirmed that Offa had promised to send an annual payment of 365 gold pieces, called mancus, to Rome. The fact that the only known example of the coin was discovered in Rome lends this theory powerful circumstantial weight. The key is the word mancus. In Anglo-Saxon England, a mancus was a unit of account worth 30 silver pennies, but the term itself is now widely believed to derive from the Arabic word mankush. This was specifically used to refer to Islamic gold dinars used throughout the Muslim world and where Islamic traders flourished. So, when Offa promised the Pope 365 mancuses, he may have very literally meant 365 dinar-style gold coins. This is where the supreme irony comes in. A Christian king, sending to his head of faith gold coins, which he mistakenly stamped with the Muslim declaration of faith. While this would be the most amusing explanation to resolve this mystery, there's actually another one which is more widely accepted. In the 8th century, the Abbasid gold dinar was the dominant high-value currency of the Mediterranean world, and the medieval equivalent of the US dollar in the region. Its weight and purity were trusted from Islamic Spain to the Levant, and anywhere in between. For English merchants, diplomats, or pilgrims traveling south, carrying a coin that looked, felt, and weighed the same as a dinar would have been a huge advantage. This was essentially their way of ensuring their coinage would be readily accepted in foreign markets. Gold was scarce in England, and by minting his own version of the most stable and prestigious currency available, Offa was piggybacking on the economic might of the Abbasid Caliphate. It was also a brilliant act of propaganda, which fits Offa to the T. By placing his name on a dinar, Offa was associating himself with the economic power of the caliphs. Ultimately, the two leading theories aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they likely represent two sides of a single sophisticated strategy. Offa had a specific obligation to send 365 gold dinars to Rome each year. He chose to copy the Abbasid dinar because it was the most trusted and recognized gold coin standard in the world. In doing so, he created a coin that could both fulfill his papal tribute and serve as a viable international currency for his subjects. The Offa Rex stamp ensured the Pope knew who the generous donation came from, while also advertising his power and sophistication along the trade routes the coin would travel. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just taking a second to remind you to hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Also, don't forget to hype up this video so it gets out to more people and I can keep producing the content you enjoy. In the early summer of 1190, the fate of the Holy Land seemed to hang in the balance. The Third Crusade, a massive Christian response to Saladin's capture of Jerusalem, was underway. While the kings of France and England prepared their sea voyages, the most formidable force was already on the march. At its head was the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I, known as Barbarossa. At nearly 70 years old, he was a living legend, a veteran of the Second Crusade, and the ruler of a vast European empire for almost 4 decades. This wasn't the crumbling ancient Holy Roman Empire of the early modern period, but rather the leading state in Europe of the time. Barbarossa commanded what was perhaps the largest crusader army ever assembled, and his campaign was a juggernaut. After navigating the Balkans, his army of up to 20,000 men, including thousands of elite heavy knights, had smashed through Seljuk Turkish resistance in Anatolia. He won a massive victory at the Battle of Iconium in 1190, and the Crusaders took substantial loot and were granted passage through to the Holy Land. Importantly for this medieval historical mystery, they also took a number of high noblemen hostage to ensure their own safety. The news was so alarming that Saladin himself abandoned the siege of Acre to prepare for the emperor's seemingly inevitable arrival. This crusade was to be the crowning achievement of Barbarossa's long and storied reign. Instead, on June 10, 1190, in the cool waters of a small river in modern-day Turkey, it all came to a sudden, bizarre, and catastrophic end. The story of how Frederick Barbarossa died is a puzzle of conflicting medieval accounts, each colored by the author's perspective and purpose. The most immediate and likely most accurate version comes from an anonymous eyewitness, a cleric traveling with the army. He penned what has become known as the letter on the death of the Emperor Frederick within days of the event, and his account is shockingly mundane. After successfully crossing a river and having lunch, the old lion, exhausted from the day's march, decided to bathe and swim to cool off from the oppressive heat. In that moment of simple leisure, he drowned in what the author calls an unexpected accident. This version presents a tragic, anticlimactic end for a great warrior. However, this simple story of an accident was, for many, an unfitting end. In a medieval world where a sudden death without final confession was seen as a bad death, implying God's disapproval, such an end was a theological crisis. Consequently, other narratives soon emerged that sought to reframe the event in a more heroic light. The Saxon Chronicle, for example, tells a more dramatic tale. In this version, the emperor, impatient with a bridge congested with his own soldiers, decided to charge across the river on his horse. Weighed down by heavy armor and caught in a swift current, he was swept away and drowned. This account transforms his death from a moment of vulnerability into an act of a warrior's impetuous will. Under this account, he was simply so full of zeal that he couldn't wait to bring the fight to the enemy. A third perspective comes from the Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir, who recorded that Barbarossa was drowned in waist-deep water through an act of divine intervention. Notably, numerous noble hostages from the Islamic world had been taken by Barbarossa's forces to ensure their safe passage to the Holy Land. It's believed that this chronicler may have derived his account from one of these individuals who witnessed what happened, or at least directly heard about it. Modern historical consensus overwhelmingly sides with the earliest, most direct source, the eyewitness account of the emperor going for a swim. The debate today isn't about whether he drowned, but about the precise medical cause behind the accident. When viewed through a biomedical lens, the story becomes chillingly clear. Barbarossa was an elderly man who was severely fatigued and overheated after a grueling march through Anatolia. The river he entered, the Salif, originates in the Taurus Mountains, and even in June, its waters would have been dangerously cold from snowmelt. The sudden immersion of an overheated, exhausted, and elderly person into icy water is a textbook recipe for a medical catastrophe. Scholars speculate he may have suffered a fatal heart attack from the shock. Another compelling theory is hydrocution syndrome, or cold water shock, where the sudden cold triggers an involuntary gasp, causing the victim to inhale water and drown almost instantly. This would explain how he could have drowned so quickly, even in water that may have been relatively shallow, neatly reconciling the Christian and Muslim accounts. In the end, what's clear is that this legendary Holy Roman Emperor wasn't struck down by an enemy. Rather, this old lion was felled by a fatal intersection of his age, his exhaustion, and the unforgiving environment. The immediate aftermath of Barbarossa's death was as chaotic as the death itself was sudden. The emperor was the charismatic heart of the expedition, and without him, the army's morale completely collapsed. The massive German army, which had struck terror into its enemies, simply disintegrated and returned home. Of his massive elite force, only a few thousand would continue to participate in the crusade, which would fail to retake Jerusalem. In the end, whatever truly happened, it appears that a single freak accident in a remote Anatolian river on June 10th, 1190, would completely change the course of history. It's a high pass in the Pyrenees Mountains in the year 778, and the sun glints off the armor of the greatest ruler of the age, Charlemagne, king of the Franks. At his side hangs a sword unlike any other, a blade so magnificent it seems to pulse with its own inner light. This is joyeuse, the joyful, a weapon that would become as legendary as the man who wielded it. In the grand medieval epics like the Song of Roland, this sword was a character in its own right, a symbol of divine authority and terrifying power. It's a story that begins in the realm of epic poetry, but ends under the quiet, climate-controlled lights of the Louvre in Paris. According to the legendary tales passed down through the generations, the sword possessed truly supernatural qualities. It was said to shine so brightly that it could outshine the sun itself, blinding Charlemagne's enemies on the battlefield and leaving them helpless before the Frankish charge. Some storytellers claimed it could change color up to 30 times a day, shifting its hue with the mood of the battle or the will of its master. Beyond its dazzling appearance, it was also said to grant its wielder immunity from poison, a practical and priceless defense for a ruler in an age of courtly intrigue. In the language of medieval literature, such attributes were a clear signal of heavenly favor, marking Charlemagne as God's chosen king and then emperor. The sword's mythic power was rooted in its very substance. The most potent legends claimed that its golden pommel encased a holy relic of immense power, a piece of the lance of Longinus, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ. This transformed joyeuse from a simple weapon of war into a sacred reliquary that traveled with the first Holy Roman Emperor. Every time Charlemagne drew his sword, he wasn't just preparing for battle, he was brandishing a symbol of the divine, making his conquests a holy mandate. Its origins were equally storied, with some tales attributing its creation to the mythical smith Wayland. Others name a craftsman named Gallus, who supposedly labored for 3 years to perfect the blade. While the magical properties of joyeuse belong to legend, the idea of Charlemagne possessing a sword of extraordinary quality is firmly grounded in historical reality. In the Frankish society of the 8th and 9th centuries, a sword was far more than a tool. It was the preeminent symbol of a free man's status, a sign of wealth and authority that was often passed down as a treasured family heirloom. For an emperor who forged a new European order, his personal sword would have been the ultimate expression of that power. The Carolingian Empire was, in fact, the epicenter of advanced sword manufacturing in Europe. Frankish blades were renowned for their quality, so much so that they were highly coveted by their fiercest enemies, the Vikings, who sought them out through trade or as spoils of combat. The pinnacle of this Frankish technological supremacy can be seen in a group of blades known today as Ulfbert swords. Originating from workshops in the Rhineland, these weapons were forged from high-carbon crucible steel. This was a material of such purity and strength that its quality wouldn't be consistently replicated in Europe until the Industrial Revolution nearly 1,000 years later. The existence of these real-life super swords from Charlemagne's era provides a crucial context for the joyeuse legend. The myth can be seen as a cultural echo of the Carolingian Empire's very real technological and military dominance. It was a story that broadcast Frankish superiority through the compelling medium of epic poetry. When we turn from the legend to the artifact resting in the Louvre, the story becomes one of evolution and adaptation. The historical consensus is clear. The sword on display is a composite object, an assembly of parts from different eras, with none dating back to the time of Charlemagne. This physical evidence is the most compelling argument against it being the emperor's personal weapon. The object we see today is more like a living document than a weapon, modified over centuries to suit the needs of its later owners. Nothing about the weapon on display today was created in the 8th century. A close examination reveals a timeline written in its very components. The blade itself is a style with a broad, tapering profile that was common in the 10th and 11th centuries. The ornate golden pommel, decorated with a motif of birds, also dates to this period and shows stylistic influences from Scandinavian art. The crossguard, fashioned into two stylized winged dragons with lapis lazuli eyes, is a later addition from the 12th century. The grip was added even later, likely in the 13th or 14th century, and was once adorned with the fleur-de-lis of the French monarchy. These were removed for the coronation of Napoleon in 1804 to symbolically show a break from the traditional French monarchy. Finally, the scabbard's oldest elements date to the 13th century, with elements being added on as late as the early 19th century. While the sword in the Louvre wasn't Charlemagne's, it played a far more significant and verifiable role in French history as the official coronation sword. The French coronation ceremony was a profoundly important ritual that affirmed a king's divine right to rule. A key part of this was establishing a direct, unbroken line of succession from Charlemagne, the symbolic father of France, Germany, and of the European order as a whole. This sword that is currently on display became the physical embodiment of that link. Its first documented appearance in a coronation was for Philip III in 1270. From that moment on, it was a centerpiece of the royal regalia, stored in the treasury of the Basilica of Saint-Denis and brought out for the crowning of each new king. The choice to identify this particular sword as joyeuse was a masterful act of political theater. In the 13th century, the Capetian dynasty was working to centralize its authority and forge a stronger unified French identity. By adopting a tangible relic supposedly from the hand of the great emperor, they were able to legitimize their own rule in a powerful, undeniable way. When a new king was girded with joyeuse, he was symbolically inheriting the mantle of Charlemagne himself. The sword in the Louvre is both the real sword and not the real joyeuse at the same time. The dating of every single one of its components post-dates Charlemagne's reign, and there are no contemporary records from his lifetime that even mention a sword by that name. While Charlemagne undoubtedly possessed numerous swords of unsurpassed quality, the one in the Louvre isn't one of the them. The legend of joyeuse enters the historical record centuries later, born from the epic poetry that romanticized the Carolingian age. But to dismiss the sword as a fake is to miss the point entirely, and its historical inauthenticity does nothing to diminish its immense cultural significance. The true importance of the Louvre sword isn't derived from who might have wielded it in the 9th century. Rather, it came from the centuries of belief, ceremony, and national identity that were invested in it as being the true weapon of one of the most influential people in history. The myth of this sword is ultimately not about Charlemagne the man, but about the enduring power of Charlemagne the idea.